First of all, welcome. Hi, everyone. It's good to be back. This is my first lecture since coming to St. Louis. I arrived just before the Super Bowl, and I'm in recovery mode. As you know, I'm from Seattle, and that was pretty brutal. I mean, that was, oh boy. Okay, so one of the things that I was conceiving for tonight's lecture, which is on Endgames, was to do to look at some Rook endings. And as it so happens, right now, today, there was two wonderful examples that I think I'm online, right? I can go to ChessBase website and download them. There was two really wonderful endgames that were played. One was from Gibraltar. David Howell was white, and Hikaru Nakamura was black. And I'll set that up in a moment. And then also Magnus Carlsen today played a game where it was 4 versus 3, a Rook ending, which he won very, very easily. And we always thought that, you know, all Rook endings are drawn. Okay, Rook endings are, when you think about the body of endings, so to speak, and you think about queen and pawn endgames, minor piece endings, rook endings, king and pawn endgames, and so forth and so on, you discover that, statistically speaking, literally half of all endgames, tournament endgames, come down to rook and pawn endings. Wow, I don't know why that is. I mean, you sit and look at a chess set and you see all of these pieces and you go, half of the time we're going to get to a rook and pawn ending. Pretty remarkable. So I wanted to talk about rook and pawn endings, and in the same measure, in the same way that I do opening analysis, I like to have a guide, somebody who's going to guide me through the endings. So when I think about players who played rook and pawn endings, I think about 3 players. I think of 3 players. Who do you guys think of? Just throw out some names that you might think are good rook and pawn endgame players. Smyslov? Capablanca. Kramnik, I heard. I think of 3. I think of Smyslov. I think of Korchnoi, Viktor Korchnoi, and I think of Akiba Rubinstein. The most remarkable thing about Akiba Rubinstein is I was just reading an article, the Scotsman from John Henderson, who was explaining that Akiba Rubinstein played something like 1,950 tournament games. Very impressive. About 1,750 of them came to rook and pawn endgames. It's like, whoa, that guy sure played a lot of rook and pawn endgames, as did Smyslov, as did Korchnoi. This endgame that I've got, obviously white stands superior. He has an extra pawn, and I've seen the white players win this position often, which is really remarkable, because Daniken Philidor from the 17th century, hi, welcome. Daniken Philidor from the 17th century had already shown how you're supposed to draw this position while you're black. What you do is very simple. You put your rook, well, let's give white a move then. You put your rook along the 6th rank or the 3rd rank. And you just keep it there. And white, we're going to make some moves for white. Check. And you step back. Okay? And basically, white has reached the zenith of what is possible for him. And he advances his pawn. The moment that he advances his pawn to the 6th or the 3rd rank, then the drawing procedure is you just go behind the pawn. You play rook down. And the whole point is, we're just going to make some moves, and you get the idea that there is no place for white's king to stand. If we go back for a moment to here, and we're going to go here, here, check, and let's say white waits. Okay? And now all black has to do is wait. He can just wait anywhere with his rook along this rank. This Philidor, this Philidor treatment of just waiting until your opponent advances the pawn is absolutely critical, and you must know this ending to be able to save rook and pawn endings. So this is a crucial one. Another crucial ending, let me just clear the board. All I have to do is type S. Yes? Yes. Save. Sure. Okay. Clear board. Yeah. Is, let's imagine there's a white rook, there's a pawn, there's a king, there's a king, and there's a rook. Okay. So, in this position, it's black to move and draw. This position was considered a win for white before Ivanchuk showed how to draw it. Essentially, what black has to do is check on the sides. Notice that there's no area in the board that the white king can escape. So we're going to go check, king, check, king, and now we wait. Okay? So for white to win the rook, the king has to be over on the queen side. As soon as the king moves to the queen side, we keep checking the black keeps checking the white king from the side. So for example, we might see, say, check here, and we wait. Yeah. So at a certain moment, white's king has to walk over to the queen side to escort the pawns, and we just keep checking from the sides. The reason I'm showing you these two examples is because of this game of David Howell and Hikaru Nakamura that I'm about to get from the website. So is this okay, or do you want me to flip it? Flip? Okay. So clearly Hikaru with the black pieces is trying to win. And we had this amazing sequence of moves that went like this. Rook h1. Oh. Okay, I'm gonna do this, 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 this. Okay, so it's black to move, and Hikaru played rook h1. Okay, so we understand the drawing checking device that white needs to make. The problem is at the moment is that the king is very close to white's rook. So in an ideal world, the king would be on b2, the rook would be on c5, and then we would have an extra file for which we could check the black king away. What happened in the game was very strange, was that rook h1, what white should have played was rook d3 check. king e4, rook c3. And now he's getting his rook to the file where he can keep checking the black king. What David Howell did instead was he played king b2. And now Hikaru had a winning moment. I should say that Hikaru was on a winning streak. He had won 6 games in a row in Gibraltar, and in my career, I had won only, bless you. In my career, I had had streaks of 6 wins 3 times. And I remember having this conversation with, against grandmasters, I mean. I remember having this conversation with Anatoly Karpov, bless you, that what was Anatoly's win streak, and he had won 4. And I said, well, I won 6 in a row. And Anatoly said, well, I bet you the grandmasters you beat weren't very good. So funny you should mention that, because one of the streaks included you. I said, okay, they were pretty good. But Hikaru was about to win his 7th game. And I'd like to ask you, what move should Hikaru play at this moment? So how many of you would like to put, yes, young man? King e4. Okay, let's analyze. If you go king e4, I'll move my rook to c5. Yeah? Okay, go ahead. King d4. Okay, I will wait. How exactly am I supposed to wait? I'll move my rook. See, this is kind of a bit of the problem that black runs into. He's going to need his king over on the queen side in order to, when he's threatening to move and promote the pawn, that he'll be able to win the rook. At the moment, the king's far away. Go ahead, yes? Rook h2 check, okay. I'll wait. I'll go king here. Actually, I think I should actually wait with my king on b1. I apologize. Just so that I can be able to check along the 3rd and 2nd ranks. Yes. King c3. So I'll check. King b4. And I'll wait. So the idea is that I'm waiting. You can move your king if you like. I'll wait some more. Move your king. And I'm waiting for you to advance your pawn to h3. And then I just want to give you a whole lot of checks. A whole lot of checks. Also, let me just point out one other very important positions. Once I get my rook when you're in this position where your rook is boxed in front of the pawn, there's no place for your king, for the black king. The moment the black king arrives on g2, so you can liberate your rook, I'm going to give you checks. So for example, I will wait, and now you're here. So now you're ready to move your rook and then advance your pawn. So the moment you come here, okay, excuse me, I'll give you a check, yeah? And I'll just keep checking you until your king is no longer protecting the pawn on a7, and I'll get behind. So pushing the pawn too soon when your rook's in the way doesn't get you a win. Let's go back to the position at hand. I think we were here. And let me just see what actually, I think it was what was played in the game. Let me just see what was played in the game. Was h4 played? King b2. King b2. That was a blunder. That was the blunder. He should have played rook d3. Now we're talking about a world-class grandmaster making a mistake in a basically very simple rook ending. King b2, h4. Okay, new main line. And then came this horrible rook d4, king e3. h4. No, I wanted to be precise. I remember the result, I remember what happened, but the actual precise moves I wanted to be precise about. So here, rook d4, and Hikaru played a horrible move that gifted away his victory. Okay? He's right at on the edge of winning. And what move do you think Hikaru played? Yeah. Correct. That was the move he played, which was terrible. Which was very, very sad. What Hikaru needed to play, what did Hikaru need to do? Remember what his problem is. His problem is that his rook is in the wrong position, and that he needs to be able to move his rook so that his king can end up in front of the pawn, and then he will win the game. He can't move the rook for the moment because it's tied to this pawn. So what should Hikaru have done? h3. And the entire difference is that after rook check, where do we move our king? Let's see what happened in the game. King e3, rook c4, and now he has his drawing position. So it was h3, rook c3 check, h3, rook c3 check, king d4, rook b3. And the player soon made a draw because white has his ideal setup. Whenever the king goes back over here, you're over here and you're making checks from the side. So this rook ending was a real surprise, and had Hikaru won it, he would have beaten my streak of 7 and matched the streak of Fabiano Caruana at 7. So I recall my conversation with Anatoly Karpov about his number of victories at 4 in a row. And at the time that we had the conversation, we didn't realize that in 1994 he would win 6 in a row in Linares. So he was very chuffed about that and reminded me that now he had gotten the same number of wins. But at the time we had our original conversation, we both looked at each other and said, "Can you imagine Bobby Fischer winning 20 in a row?" And Anatoly said no. Just no, 20 in a row. But that was one from Hikaru. Another one I wanted to show, Wijk aan Zee is a small coastal town in Holland, and they had a very, very big chess festival that recently ended. And I was there, oops, that was not what I wanted. Two kings. Two kings. I was there doing commentary, live broadcast of the festival. And this position, or something very similar to it, had occurred. Oh, yes, okay, go away. And this was classic. Okay, so it's game one. It's round one. Vassily Ivanchuk is white. Baadur Jobava is black. And it's Jobava. And it's clear that white's rook, in a rook ending, it is really bad. Normally speaking, in rook endings, it's really crucial that your rook be active.
But because there's too much pawn, it's blocking the whole way.
Yeah, all those pawns blocking everything up. And white is doing his best to save the position. And for example, after a move like a5, a4, this rook, escape. This rook on a3 is tied to this pawn, and white should be very careful about advancing the pawn too early, because then the black king is going to get back and save the position. So I was thinking that white would try to play the move king d6, and then after, for example, pawn takes, rook over, white has good drawing chances to try to draw the game. Instead, and this is very critical to understand, in rook endings, there are often those moments where you can offer the trade of rooks, right? And you go into a king and pawn endgame. But king and pawn endgames are those endings where you've burned your bridges. In other words, once you're in a king and pawn endgame, either it's lost or it's drawn, or won, right? I mean, there's no, I'm going to outplay my opponent anymore. You know, you're in the soup. So I was thinking that black was going to play the move a5, a4, and I went and looked at some other games. I came back while doing the commentary, and black had played rook a4, offering a trade of rooks. Now, how many of you think this was a good idea by black to offer the trade of rooks? How many of you think it was a bad idea? I thought it was a bad idea, yeah? But I wasn't too sure. I mean, there are times that, for example, rook takes, pawn takes, it's going to be very awkward for white's king to handle these pawns. So Vassily started thinking, and I was trying to understand the position, for example, after rook takes, pawn takes. Now, I've got to stop this a pawn, king to c4. Now, king to c6, and it's clear that black's king, black is going to use this pawn as a decoy to bring his king here and to try to eat all of white's pawns. Sorry? But it's capture. Or, in this position, I could also play this move. This move might actually be more accurate. Pardon me. It takes king here. And I hadn't come to a conclusion, only it just felt wrong to offer the trade of rooks. Went on to analyze some other games, and I was told, Ivanchuk won. Jobava resigned. I was like, what? So in this position, Vassily had just captured the rook and Jobava resigned. Like, what's that? You don't resign, you take the rook. Later you can resign, you can always resign, but why resign right here? Not take the rook first and then resign. And so now I was trying to figure out what's going on. If I take the rook, king c4, take the pawn, king c6, you know, like what should white do? And then suddenly, instantly, there was Vassily in the studio. Hey, come on over, Vassily. Congratulations on your win. Could you show us the game? And he did a magnificent job. He went through the game explaining all of the intricacies and the key moments and why he was worse and da-da-da-da. And then I said, well, thank you very much. And he finished. And I said, well, thank you very much, Vassily, but could you explain for the audience why black resigned? Yeah. Yeah. And Vassily went, brrr. And I said, well, thank you very much, Vassily, but could you take it one move at a time? And he said, sure. So he said, rook takes a4, pawn takes, king c4, takes on f5, takes on f5, king c6. I intended to play king d3. And after king d5, what move did Vassily have in mind? e6. Whoa. Takes. And now what move did Vassily have in mind? F6, correct. And now after king d6? c4. And now after e5? c5 check. And after king here? c6. And after a3? c7, king here, f7, here. Knight? What? What? You should queen with check. And then after takes queen with check. Again. And now you have queen a3. So this was the and I said, very nice. Thank you very much, Vassily. That was a very good explanation. And he said to me, well, any good grandmaster would see that. It's like, bang, insulted on my own show. Like, whoosh. Thank you, Vassily. Now, the funny part of that story was that a dear friend of mine, Ivan Sokolov, he's a Grandmaster 2700, he had been watching the show and he didn't understand why Ivanchuk resigned. So when Ivanchuk gave the explanation, everything was very clear, and he started laughing like, poor Yasser, you know. Then that next day, Sokolov, Ivan, had gone to the breakfast. And at the breakfast was a Grandmaster Ivan Saric. Ivan Saric was playing in the Masters group. And they were getting their orange juice and their eggs and stuff. And Ivan Saric asked Sokolov, could you tell me why Jobava resigned? And Ivan said, of course, just like Ivanchuk had said. And Saric understood, and Sokolov said, and any decent grandmaster would see that. So, like the insults had ripple effects that went on and on. Now I'd like to show you a game, just a second, that was played today. It was the Magnus Carlsen game. Here is a very nice ending. Magnus is white, Magnus Carlsen. He's white and he's a pawn ahead. But this is not the notorious rook and 4 versus rook and 3. If we take this d4 pawn and we put it on f4, it would be rook and 4 versus rook and 3, and a very likely draw. With the pawn on d4, however, the position's an easy win for white. And why is it an easy win? First of all, it's a pass pawn. When the pawn is on f4, white doesn't have a pass pawn in the position. Secondly, white's king, unlike in the examples that we saw with Philidor and with Nakamura, white's king is going to have a very easy time finding a pocket where it's nicely insulated and protected. For example, the way we would like to win the game is by bringing our king to e4. Notice there are no checks. We would advance our pawn to e5. We'd advance our king to e5 and our pawn to e4. We'll move our rook, check, and advance our king to f6. Okay, so we've got a very easy plan in mind, and black has to do his best to try to slow white down. One of the things that black might do is bring his rook over to the h file in order to harass the h4 pawn. So let me just see. It was rook a5 to stop the king from advancing. Rook f4. Rook b5 waiting. Could anybody tell me why, in this position, black didn't play the move king e6? What was wrong with... So, if you go king e6, variation, and I give check, can I just take the pawn?
No, you rook f. No,
Ah, rook f6 check, and then you get my rook. Okay, just wanted to make sure you guys were on your toes. Okay, so rook b5, and white played d5, king over, e4, and now white has his ideal situation. So what white wants to do, again, notice that unfortunately for black, he has no checks with his rook, and white's king is perfectly comfortable here on e5. Notice also that the king can enter through d6 or f6. The only thing white has to do is swing his rook over to a7 check, force the king back, and then he gets to advance with his king. Rook d3. There goes the h-pawn. But the h-pawn doesn't matter. And here, Michael gave it up because he's just going to have rook takes f7 check and two connected pass pawns. This game, by the way, Magnus just played a really, really wonderful game, almost mistake-free. It's like the guy just doesn't blow it. He always manages to find very nettlesome continuations to put pressure on his opponent, and he very, very rarely makes major mistakes. So a very impressive game, and for me, I look out for these rook endings as they're being played, and it just was a kind of coincidence that I was coming in today's lecture to talk about rook endings, and I saw these examples being played today. Another crucial rook ending that you absolutely have to know is this one. Remember that position where there was a black pawn and there was a rook in the way? Well, now we have the classical position. It's white to play and to win. How many of you know this ending? Like this ending you should just know like the back of your hand. It's really good. Yes, young man. What do you think white should do? Rook c8 check. A very good move indeed. That was because I misset up the position and you knew that the rook was going to go to c8. Yes. Okay. So now we've got this position, and normally speaking, what white is trying to do is advance his pawn and to win black's rook. So let's see how he would do that. We'll just play a few moves first. Okay, so we've got go. Who did that? I must be the guilty one. Just a moment. So we just had these moves. Rook c8 check, king g7, king here, rook here, check, king here, rook here, pawn here. Now, the point is white's king needs to move out of the promotion square so that he could promote his pawn, but the moment white's king moves out like now, he will just get checked oops, black to move. He will just get checked, and it will be an endless series of checks until white's king is forced right back, and we get this position. So white has to do something to prepare for his king to come out. And young man, you had rook, where? F4, rook F4. Okay. So, what's the big idea of rook F4? I'll wait. Yes, young man.
I'm just going to build a bridge to, once the king gets up to d5, then after the black is captured, then rook d4 blocks it.
Right. So what the young man is saying is this concept of building a bridge. White needs his rook to help him build a bridge for his king to come up. So check, king, check, king, check, king to d5. Again, white is threatening to promote, and so after check, we built our bridge. So there are certain rook endings that you absolutely have to know. This one is one of them, where your king is in front of the pawn, and how to promote your pawn and to win it. Also, from the defensive point of view, the Philidor position, the Lucena position, and so on. I do want to encourage you to study your rook and pawn endgames, to know the really basic ones where there's just a king, a rook, and pawn versus king and rook. So things like what happened to Hikaru won't happen to you. You deserve to win a well-played game, and to just, you know, let the wins slip away at the last moment. That really is hurtful. And the players that I think are fantastic guides to rook and pawn endings were the three I mentioned: Rubinstein, Smyslov, and Korchnoi. I can certainly suggest that Capablanca belongs in there as well. But those players in particular played rook endings fantastically well. So please do make an effort to study their games.